Chapter 1. Immediate divergence. The announcement hits late 2025 like a flare over the Arctic. Denmark confirms it is negotiating a sovereignty transfer. The United States confirms it is ready to pay. And Greenland confirms it will decide by referendum, not by press conference. Within hours, every map on every screen looks less like geography and more like a warning. The outside world calls it a purchase because that's the easiest word. The documents avoid that word on purpose. They call it a transfer, paired with guarantees that Greenland demanded and Denmark insisted on. Self-government remains. Language protections are written into law. Land ownership rules are tightened to block a speculative land rush. And a defence compact is attached so tightly that it becomes part of the same deal. Those are the promises. The divergence is simpler. In early 2026, Copenhagen stops treating the idea as unthinkable. Washington stops treating it as a stunt. And Nuuk stops treating independence as a distant dream and turns it into a bargaining weapon. The reason is not romance. It is fear and leverage arriving at the same time. Russian aviation tests the edge of the North Atlantic more aggressively. Arctic shipping traffic keeps rising. A chain of supply shocks makes critical minerals sound like a national security term instead of a trade policy term. And Greenland's leaders watch the world's attention lock onto their island with a hunger that feels familiar. Inside Greenland, the political fight ignites immediately. Some call it a trap dressed up as a contract. Others call it the only moment Greenland will ever have to force binding protections out of a superpower. In Denmark, the fight is just as sharp. Opponents call it selling history. Supporters call it recognizing reality and refusing to be the weak link in the Arctic's next crisis. In the United States, the fight turns toxic in a day. Some lawmakers want the strategic gain without the long-term responsibility. Others warn that if America takes Greenland, it inherits every problem that comes with governing it, at Arctic prices, under constant global scrutiny. Nuuk listens to all of it. Then Nuuk adds a condition that makes the deal possible and explosive. Greenland will accept US sovereignty only through a staged transition. First comes a decade of protected self-rule under a territorial framework with its own courts and guaranteed funding. Then comes another vote. Not a symbolic one. A vote with an exit ramp built in, because Greenland refuses to sign away the future forever. Washington agrees, because the alternative is worse. More competition, more ambiguity, and a high north that becomes an unmanaged contest zone. Copenhagen agrees because it gets to leave without pretending it is abandoning anyone. Greenland agrees because it gets something it has never had before. A contract that forces the world's largest power to keep showing up. The referendum is scheduled, the campaigns begin, and while people argue in town halls and on docks, foreign intelligence services start arguing too, quietly, through screens. By the time Greenlanders step into voting booths, the island is already under siege. Not by soldiers, by narratives. Chapter 2. Short-term consequences. The vote passes, narrowly, not with celebration, but with relief that it ended cleanly. Greenland's leaders stand in front of cameras and repeat the same line until it becomes a shield. This was our decision. The legal transfer happens fast after that, because speed is part of the bargain. The longer the transition drags, the more time everyone has to sabotage it. In Nuuk, the first visible change is paperwork. New IDs, new customs procedures, new agencies arriving with new acronyms and new priorities. The first invisible change is more dangerous. Money starts moving. Federal funding arrives for infrastructure, housing, ports, and communications. Contractors arrive right behind it. So do investors, consultants, lobbyists, and opportunists who smell a once-in-a-generation opening. Greenland's government tries to control the pace. Washington's bureaucracy does not understand the pace. A grant program designed for a small American state hits a small Arctic society like a wave. It creates jobs. It also creates a fight over who gets them. Local hiring rules become the first major conflict with US contractors. Greenland's leaders want training pipelines and guaranteed percentages. American firms want flexibility, which is a polite way to import labor. The first strike isn't over ideology. It's over pay scales, housing, and whether local workers are being treated as partners or decorations. The defense side escalates even faster. The US announces upgrades to Arctic warning systems and satellite links. It says it's modernizing, not expanding. People in nearby towns see more flights and more fences and stop caring about the wording. Denmark watches from the outside and realizes what it has done. It has traded a complicated responsibility for a complicated wound. The Danish public debate turns bitter. Some accuse the government of surrendering to American pressure. Others accuse it of ignoring Greenland's wishes for decades and then acting shocked when Greenland takes a deal. Washington gets pulled into that argument too. Congressional hearings become theatre. One side frames Greenland as a strategic bargain. The other frames it as a bottomless pit. Neither side talks enough about what Greenland asked for in the first place: dignity backed by enforceable rules. Then the first serious shock hits. A coordinated cyber attack takes down parts of Nuuk's communications and scrambles logistics systems tied to the new territorial administration. It isn't catastrophic, but it is surgical. It targets trust. For a week, rumors outrun facts. People whisper that the US can't even keep the lights on. Federal officials whisper that Greenland's systems were never secure to begin with. Greenland's leaders demand an emergency security task force with Greenlandic oversight. Washington agrees, then tries to staff it with people who have never set foot on the island. The compromise comes too late to prevent the real damage. The attack convinces everyone of the same thing for different reasons. This is no longer a political experiment. It's a front line. Chapter 3: Medium-term instability. Once Greenland becomes American on paper, the island becomes a mirror. Every US political argument reflects into it. Elections in faraway states suddenly shape housing policy in Nuuk. Budget fights in Washington suddenly decide whether a runway gets finished before winter. And every time America's mood swings, Greenland feels it like weather. The territorial framework is designed to protect self-rule. Protection requires enforcement. That is where the instability begins. The first flashpoint is resources. New surveys and new investment make mining proposals multiply. Some are serious, some are fantasy. All of them carry the same tension. Greenland wants revenue and jobs, but Greenland does not want to become a sacrifice zone for somebody else's supply chain. Environmental rules become the battlefield. Washington wants streamlined permitting to show progress. Greenland's parliament demands local veto power over sensitive areas. The compromise is a joint permitting board with binding Greenlandic representation. The board is immediately flooded with lawsuits, appeals, and lobbying pressure. One project becomes symbolic. A rare earth mine promises long-term jobs and strategic independence from foreign suppliers. It also threatens a nearby community's water and traditional hunting routes. Opponents aren't anti-development. They are anti-dispossession. Protests grow. So does the counter-protest from workers who want a future that doesn't require leaving home. Then the disinformation returns, sharper than before. Fake videos, forged documents, rumors of secret clauses in the sovereignty agreement. The goal is not to convince everyone. It's to convince enough people that no one can be trusted. Washington responds in a way that makes sense to Washington. It increases security. It expands surveillance around ports and military-linked facilities. It starts treating political agitation as something that can be managed. That is gasoline on a Greenlandic fire. Greenland's leaders point to the contract. They demand limits and oversight. Federal agencies resist because they can't accept a territory telling them how to do security. The conflict becomes personal. A Greenlandic minister accuses US officials of building a security state under the cover of defense. US officials accuse Greenlandic politicians of endangering the island by refusing to face reality. Meanwhile, the Arctic continues warming, and the sea continues opening. More ships, more accidents, More rescue operations. The US promises better search and rescue capabilities and builds them. And then comes the incident that turns politics into fear. A foreign vessel, operating too close to restricted waters, collides with an American patrol craft during a storm. No one dies. It doesn't need to. Within days, Washington demands stricter control. Within days, Nuke demands stricter consent. And within days, the rest of the world learns the new rule of the Arctic. Greenland is where misunderstandings become international crises. Chapter 4. Long-term global changes. After the transfer, the Arctic stops being a side theatre. It becomes the hinge. The US pours money into ice-capable logistics, radar coverage, and satellite resilience. It says it is stabilizing a region that can't be ignored. Rivals hear something else. They hear America building a wall of sensors across the top of the world. Russia responds with more patrols, more exercises, and more brinkmanship near air and sea lanes. China responds differently. It invests in shipping partnerships, port influence abroad, and technology that makes it harder to isolate. The contest becomes layered, not one Cold War, but several overlapping competitions. Military posture, industrial policy, and control over the story of who belongs in the Arctic. Greenland sits inside all of them. And as the years pass, the island changes in ways that no treaty can prevent. More people arrive for work. Housing expands. Culture shifts under the pressure of new money and new attention. Some communities gain new schools, clinics, and opportunities. Other communities feel squeezed by rising costs and a sense that decisions are being made by people who can leave whenever they want. The political centre in Nuuk hardens. It becomes more disciplined, more strategic, and less romantic about alliances. Greenland's leaders learn the language of Washington well enough to fight Washington in its own courts. That becomes the second great conflict of this timeline. The sovereignty agreement promised protection. Protection now requires litigation, constant negotiation, and the willingness to threaten the one thing Washington cannot lose: legitimacy. So Greenland's parliament starts playing the ultimate card, the 10-year review vote. Every time Washington overreaches, Greenland's leaders remind the US public that the arrangement is conditional. Every time Nuuk pushes too hard, Washington reminds Greenland that federal money has a thermostat. The relationship becomes a permanent standoff disguised as partnership. Then the global consequences spiral outward. A major crisis erupts elsewhere, and the high north becomes the shortest, fastest route for power projection. Air corridors fill with activity. Submarines play deeper games. Early warning systems become more sensitive, because sensitivity feels like safety. That sensitivity creates a new danger. A false alarm in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It ripples through command chains designed to move quickly. One winter night, an automated warning system flags an anomalous launch signature over the polar region. It is a malfunction, triggered by an unusual atmospheric event and a software update rushed through for resilience. The system does what it was designed to do. It panics quietly, in perfect machine logic. Humans catch it in time, not because the system is perfect, because someone hesitates, because someone remembers that speed can be a trap. For a week, no one talks publicly about how close it came. In Nuuk, people feel it anyway. More fences go up, more sensors appear, and a place that once argued about self-determination now argues about whether it is living inside a giant tripwire. Chapter 5. Final Outcome. The final cost arrives the way it always does. Not in a dramatic ceremony, but in a policy memo. After years of pressure, Washington passes an Arctic Security Harmonization Act. It is presented as coordination. It is, in practice, a partial override. Federal authorities gain expanded power to designate restricted zones, control communications infrastructure during security events, and fast-track military-linked construction. The law includes language about local consultation. Consultation is not consent. Greenland's parliament challenges it immediately. The courts stall. National security cases always stall, because delay is a form of control. Protests return, larger this time, because the issue is no longer a mine or a port. It is sovereignty inside sovereignty. Washington responds with calm statements and firm boundaries. It cannot retreat without inviting rivals to test the gap. It cannot advance without proving every warning Greenland's opponents ever made. So it does what great powers do when trapped. It tightens its grip while insisting the grip is temporary. A new generation grows up with better internet, better hospitals, and a stronger local government than Greenland ever had under Denmark. That same generation grows up passing through checkpoints. It grows up watching surveillance drones trace lazy circles over the coastline. It grows up learning that a restricted area can expand with a signature made thousands of miles away. The world learns the larger lesson too. The Arctic doesn't become a new frontier of cooperation. It becomes the cleanest line of competition, because it is the shortest route and the least forgiving environment. And Greenland becomes the place where America proves what it really means when it says it will protect something. Protection turns into presence. Presence turns into control. And control, even when it starts with paperwork and promises, has a way of rewriting a culture from the edges inward. By the time the 10-year review arrives, the vote is no longer about money. It is about whether Greenland can still say no. Because in this world, the United States doesn't just buy an island. It buys a responsibility it cannot set down without losing face. And Greenland doesn't just gain a superpower's protection. It becomes the lock on the door of the Arctic. Once that lock is installed, no one is allowed to forget it exists. Epilogue. One moment is all it takes to rewrite centuries, and no one gets to control what follows. Until next time.